At 81 years old, Al Kooper speaks not with nostalgia, but with the authority of a man who stood inside the engine room of rock history while it was still being built. And when he finally reveals the 10 bands that meant the most to him, the list feels less like personal taste and more like a blueprint of how modern music came to exist. Kooper has always been a quiet architect, the musician who slipped into history rather than shouting his way through it. From the immortal Hammond organ line on Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone to his role in shaping blues rock, jazz rock, and soul-infused rock long before those labels made sense. Because of that, Kooper never judged bands by chart positions or mythology. He judged them by courage, integrity, and whether they pushed music forward instead of protecting comfort. At the top of his lifelong admiration stood the Rolling Stones, not as celebrities, but as translators of American blues for a global audience that didn't yet understand its power. To Kooper, the Stones mattered because they refused to clean up the dirt, the sexuality, or the danger that lived inside the blues. Instead of polishing it, they amplified it, carrying Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf into stadiums without erasing the pain or grit that made the music honest. Right beside them stood the Beatles, though for completely different reasons. Kooper didn't revere them simply because they conquered the world. He respected them because they treated the studio like an instrument and refused to stay the same band twice. What fascinated him most was their willingness to abandon safety at the height of success, to dismantle their own formulas and rebuild themselves album by album, proving that evolution was not betrayal but survival. For Kooper, the Stones and the Beatles represented the two essential poles of rock, raw tradition and fearless experimentation, and everything that mattered lived somewhere between them. From there, Kooper's list moved inward, toward the artists who reshaped culture under pressure rather than applause, beginning with Bob Dylan's Electric Era bands. The musicians who stood on stage while audiences booed, cursed, and walked out, knowing they were participating in something irreversible. Kooper didn't admire them just for their musicianship. He admired them for their nerve. He understood that backing Dylan during that transition meant accepting isolation, criticism, and misunderstanding, yet those bands pushed forward anyway, permanently breaking the wall between folk, rock, poetry, and protest. That same emotional intelligence is why the band occupied a sacred place in Kooper's mind. He viewed them not as virtuosos chasing attention, but as craftsmen who understood restraint, storytelling, and the power of collective identity. To Kooper, the band proved that music could feel ancient and modern at the same time, that humility could be stronger than ego, and that songs rooted in shared humanity could outlive trends, movements, and even the people who wrote them. He believed their influence ran deeper than radio or record sales, shaping how musicians thought about authenticity itself. Kooper's respect for Cream came from a different place entirely. Where others saw excess and volume, Kooper saw discipline hiding inside chaos. Cream mattered because they demonstrated that virtuosity didn't have to destroy songwriting, that improvisation could exist inside structure, and that tension between strong personalities could be transformed into explosive creativity rather than collapse. In Kooper's eyes, Cream didn't just showcase talent. They proved that power and precision could coexist without apology. Another cornerstone of his musical worldview was the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, a group Kooper saw as a cultural bridge rather than a commercial entity. He admired them for their authenticity, for honoring Chicago blues without diluting it, and for introducing white audiences to a musical language rooted in Black American experience with respect rather than imitation. To Kooper, Butterfield's band legitimized blues rock in a way no amount of commercial success ever could, because it came from understanding, not appropriation. As Kooper aged, he became increasingly aware that the bands he loved most were not the loudest or the flashiest, but the ones willing to take risks without guarantees. And that realization shaped how he viewed his own career. He never chased stardom because he had seen what it did to artists who confused visibility with value. Instead, he aligned himself with bands and musicians who prioritized truth over comfort, evolution over repetition, and courage over approval. By the time Kooper reached his 80s, these reflections were no longer about ranking greatness. They were about recognizing spirit. The invisible force that separates music that lasts from music that simply exists. And as he continued naming the bands that shaped him, a pattern emerged. Every one of them challenged something fundamental, whether it was genre boundaries, audience expectations, or the fear of change itself, revealing that Al Kooper's favorites were never just bands he enjoyed, but bands that taught him how to survive in an industry that often punishes honesty. As Al Kooper moved deeper into reflection, his admiration naturally expanded beyond influence into philosophy, and that is where bands like Blood, Sweat and Tears took on a heavier meaning than most outsiders ever realized. Because for Kooper, this wasn't just a favorite band.